Good day, it's Q from Golden Circle Games, and today I'm going to do another deck tech for Raff Capashen this time. Started off as a bit of a historic creatures deck, ended up being Planeswalkers and a mixture of different things. It's an Azorius deck, it does Azorius things, so we'll get into it. This is my daughter, Niambi, said Teferi. I'm sorry, your daughter? Raff asked, confused. My father used to be an immortal, Niambi asked kindly. He ages very slowly. I've been catching up to him for years. Teferi gestured for them to come into the camp, and as they all took seats around the fire, he said, And to what do I owe this visit? Gideon was a little startled when Jhoira cut right to the point. She said, We're going to kill Belzenlok, and we need a time mage to help us get into the Stronghold. Teferi lifted his brows. A time mage, and you think I know a likely one? With an indulgent smile, Jhoira said, Teferi, don't tease. You know we need your help. Teferi leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Jhoira, we're not camping in the desert because this is how my daughter and I enjoy spending our leisure time. We are working on something very important. Like what? Liliana asked, watching him with narrow-eyed speculation. That ancient ruin, maybe? It's not that ancient, Teferi corrected. It's younger than me. Raff Capashen's Ship's Mage is a 2 and Azorius 3/3 flyer with flash, which means you can play him any time that you can play an instant. Raff also says that you may cast historic spells as though they had flash, so the aim of this deck is to cast historic spells such as artifacts, legendary creatures and planeswalkers on our opponent's turn when their defences are down. This deck walks a fine line between a Teferi Super Friends deck and a control deck, and is sneaky and fun to play. You never feel like you're really lost for anything to do. Our win cons are infinite extra turns with the ultimates of our Teferi Planeswalkers, getting value and power from some of the other ultimates on our Planeswalkers, and if all else fails, swinging with indestructible, powerful, evasive creatures for the win. The deck at this time runs about $420 or €295. First we have Soul Ring, tap to add 2 colourless mana. And we've got Mind Stone, tap to add a colourless mana, or we pay 1, sacrifice it and draw a card. Arcane Signet, tap to add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's identity. Prismatic Lens, tap to add 1 colourless mana, pay 1, tap it to add a mana of any colour. Azorius Signet, pay 1, add Azorius. Marble Diamond, enters the battlefield tapped, only costs 2 mana, tapped, add 1 white mana. Sky Diamond, enters the battlefield tapped, we can tap it to add a blue mana. Azorius Locket, tap to add a white or a blue, or we can play 4 hybrid Azorius mana, sacrifice it and draw 2 cards. Chromatic Lantern, lands you control have tapped one and add 1 mana of any colour, and then we can tap it to add 1 mana of any colour. And finally we have Chromatic Orrery, you may spend mana as though it was any mana of any colour, tap it to add 5 colourless mana, and we can pay 5 into it, draw a card for each colour among permanents we control. For our board wipes, we've got Rout. You may cast Rout as though it had flash if you paid 2 more to cast it. Destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Time Wipe, return a creature you control to your hand, then destroy all creatures. Urza's Ruinous Blast is a legendary sorcery, which means we can cast that at instant speed with our commander in play. Exile all non-land permanents that aren't legendary, which is most of our board, if not all of our board, and very little on our opponent's board, hopefully. Raven Form, exile target artifact or creature, its controller gets a 1/1 bird, creature token with flying. We can also foretell this spell for 1 blue. Khan's Temporal Sundering, target player takes an extra turn after this one, return 1 non-land permanent to its owner's hand, exile Khan's Temporal Sundering. Swords to Plowshare, exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Then we have Aetherize, return all attacking creatures to their owner's hands. Great if your opponents are swinging out at your Planeswalkers. And then we have Return to Dust, exile target artifact or enchantment. If you cast a spell during your main phase, you may exile up to one other target artifact or enchantment. So a couple of removal, or at instant speed, just one removal. We've got Absorb, counter target spell, you gain 3 life. Dovin's Veto, this spell can't be countered, counter target non-creature spell. Negate, counter target non-creature spell. Then a little bit more for our control. Render Silent, which counters a target spell. Its controller can't cast spells this turn. Silence, which is an instant that says your opponents can't cast spells this turn. Great way of shutting down a deck that's trying to outpace you. Teferi's Protection, until your next turn your life total can't change and you gain protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out and then it exiles itself. Moving on to a bit more of the janky control stuff, we've got Azor the Lawbringer, which is flying Sphinx. When Azor the Lawbringer enters the battlefield, each opponent can't cast instants or sorcery spells during that player's next turn, and then whenever Azor attacks you may pay X white and blue. If you do, you gain an X life and you draw X cards. Gadrick the Wizard, he is X and 3 blue. He's a human wizard, and when Gadrick the Wizard enters the battlefield, draw X cards, and whenever you cast a blue spell, tap target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Grand Arbiter Augustine the 4th, white spells you control cost 1 less to cast, blue spells you control cost 1 less to cast, spells your opponents control cost 1 more to cast. It gives you some spells a 3 mana swing in either way. Kira, Great Glass Spinner, is 1 blue for a flying creature. Creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes a target of a spell or ability for the first time each turn, counter that spell or ability. Bit of protection for your creatures. Lavinia the 10th has protection from red. When Lavinia the 10th enters the battlefield, detain each non-land permanent your opponents control with converted mana cost to 4 or less, which is a little bit of a board wipe early game, which is pretty good. Lavinia Azorius Renegade, each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls, and whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Lavinia, Keeper of Silence, flying, activated abilities your creatures your opponents control can't be activated. Great way of shutting some decks down. Mandate of Peace, cast it only during combat. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn, and then you end the combat phase, which basically ends an attack phase at your Planeswalkers or at you. Maybe somebody create a Hoof Behemoth and you get Mandate of Peace out. You shutting down their turn. Thassa, Deep Dwelling, indestructible as long as your devotion to blue is less than 5. Thassa isn't a creature. At the beginning of your end step, exile up to 1 other creature you control and then return that card to the battlefield under your control. And more importantly, 3 in a blue, tap another target creature, which allows you to control the game state a little bit. Great for bouncing Azor the Lawbringer or Lavinia the 10th. You know, these things that shut down decks when they ETB, or draw you cards when they ETB or something like that. So just a great card for this deck. Kasmina, Enigmatic Mentor, spells your opponents cast that target a creature or Planeswalker you control costs 2 more to cast. Good defense for your creatures, good defense for your Planeswalkers. And then you can -2 her to create a 2/2 blue wizard creature token, draw a card and then discard a card. So card draw, bodies on the field to protect them. Pretty good card. Arcanus the Omnipotent, tap, draw 3 cards, return Arcanis to its hand for 2 and blue. Dragonlord Ojutai, flying. Dragonlord has hexproof as long as it's untapped. Whenever the Dragonlord deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Ephara, God of the Plains, has indestructible. As long as your devotion to white and blue is less than 7, Ephara isn't a creature. And at the beginning of each upkeep, if you had another creature enter the battlefield under your control last turn, draw a card. Not too difficult to do in this deck. Then we have Isperia, Supreme Judge, flying, and whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, you may draw a card. Imrith, Desert Doom, is flying. Desert Doom has ward 4 as long as it's untapped, and whenever Imrith deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and then if you have fewer than 3 cards in your hand, you draw cards equal to the difference. Kefnet the Mindful has flying, indestructible. Kefnet the Mindful can't attack or block unless you have 7 or more cards in your hand. Generally I have more than 7 cards in my hand in this deck. And you can pay 3 in a blue, draw a card, you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. Solemn Simulacrum, whenever it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it into the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And then when Solemn Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. Tezzeret's Gambit, draw 2 cards, then proliferate, which means we can add a counter on each of any other permanent that already has a counter on it, like our Planeswalkers. Emergency Powers, each player shuffles his or her hand into the graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards, exile it, and it has addendum. If you cast a spell during your main phase, you may put a permanent card with converted mana cost 7 or less from your hand onto the battlefield. So at instant speed, it's disruption for decks that like the graveyard. At sorcery speed, it's just value, getting something 7 or less mana out onto our hand onto the battlefield is just amazing. Time Reversal, each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into his or her library, then draws 7 cards, exile it. Very much the same as Emergency Powers without the addendum part. And then Bident of Thassa, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. A little bit of a benefit here, if we can pay 1 and a blue, creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. If we've got one of our attack steps or our bounce spells in our hand, we can bounce the cards back to the player's hands whilst they're in combat. Something like that, we might be able to shut down a player with this. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, +1, draw a card at the beginning of the next end step, untap 2 lands. -3 to put target non-land permanent into its owner's library, 3rd from the top, and then -8 for its ultimate. You can get an emblem whenever you draw a card, exile a target permanent opponent controls. Really devastating if we can put one of our wheel spells out as well. Teferi, Master of Time, you may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn. Anytime you could cast an instant. Fantastic ability. +1, draw a card, discard a card. -3, target creature you don't control phases out. And then -10, take 2 extra turns after this one. If we get to ultimate this, we can really just win the game. Teferi, Temporal Archmage, is another Planeswalker. Look, +1 to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other one into the bottom of your library. -1, untap 4 target permanents. Fantastic for getting those extra abilities. -10, you get an emblem with whenever you activate, you may activate loyalty abilities of planeswalkers you control any player's turn, anytime you can cast an instant. And then you can make this your commander, but we haven't done in this instance. Teferi, Time Raveler, each opponent can cast spells only any time they could cast a sorcery, slows everyone down. +1 until you end of your next turn. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. -3, return up to one target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand. Draw a card. Teferi Timebender. +2, untap one target artifact or creature, which will go infinite with the Chain Veil. -3, you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. And then -9, take an extra turn after this one. With Teferi, who slows the sunset, +1, choose up to one target artifact, one target creature, and one target land. Untap the chosen permanents you control. Tap the chosen permanents you don't control. You gain 2 life. -2, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. And -7, you get an emblem with untapped permanents you control during each opponent's untapped step, and you draw a card during each opponent's draw step, which is a Seaborn Muse with additional draw step on each turn, and it's just amazing. If you ever ultimate this, it's fantastic. We have the Chain Veil, which at the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate loyalty abilities of a Planeswalker this turn, you lose 2 life, but you can tap it. For each Planeswalker you control, you may activate one of its loyalty abilities once this turn, as though none of its loyalty abilities have been activated this turn. And if you pair that with something like Nix's Shrine to Nyx and Teferi, who slows the sunset, you get sort of a potential for an infinite combo there, where you can tap and untap Chain Veil and the land as well, and get infinite mana and infinite Chain Veil and infinite activations, and just go off for a turn. And if you've got one of the other Planeswalkers out, you can get infinite extra turns, you can get infinite emblems, and just be able to draw a ton of cards and be able to do a ton of extra work for the deck. And then here we have the more salt-inducing Planeswalkers in the deck. Narset Transcendent. +1, look at the top card of your library. If it's a non-creature, non-land card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. -2, when you cast the next instant or sorcery spell from your hand this turn, it gains rebound. And then -9, you get an emblem with your opponents can't cast non-creature spells. She comes in with such a high Planeswalker loyalty that she can be very difficult to get rid of. And she can be very easy to ult if we have certain things out on the board. So yeah, she's pretty devastating for some deck types. Narset Pyre Veil says each opponent can't draw more than one card each turn, and even -2, you can look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature card, non-land card from among them, put that into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And that can also be quite devastating for some serious card draw decks. So a couple of additional Planeswalker benefits here. Niambi Faithful Healer. When Niambi Faithful Healer enters the battlefield, you may search your library and or graveyard for an instant card, for a card named Teferi Timebender. Reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search the library this way, shuffle it. That will allow you to get one of our Planeswalkers out of the deck. And then we have Oath of Teferi, and when it enters the battlefield, exile another permanent you control, return it to the battlefield under its own control at the beginning of the next end step, and then you may activate the loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than only once. So pretty decent ability there for getting our Planeswalkers up to scratch as quickly as possible. The other alternative win con here is Heroes Podium, which says each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other legendary you control. X, tap it, look at the top X cards of your library. You may reveal a legendary creature from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library in any random order. That will pump up pretty much everything on our board to ridiculous powers. A lot of our creatures will have Death Touch, a lot of our creatures will be able to return and be able to stick on the board for long periods of time. Lots of our creatures have evasion, and we can get some decent damage in with these, as well as with our our commander as well. And then some of those creatures that have that ability to swing in is God Eternal Kefnet, who has flying, which is decent evasion for any deck. You may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it, and whenever you reveal an instance or sorcery card this way, copy that card. You may cast the copy. That copy costs 2 less to cast, and when God Eternal Kefnet dies, put it into or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library third from the top, which allows us to get it back or keep it around as much as possible. God Eternal Ketra has double strike, and whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 4/4 black warrior creature token with vengeance. Pretty big body on the field just for casting a creature. And then when God Eternal Ketra dies or is put into the exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library third from the top. Heliod, God of the Sun, is indestructible, and as long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have vigilance, and then we can pay 2 and 2 white, create a 2/1 white cleric enchantment creature token, which is pretty powerful, pretty decent. Then we have Medamai the Aegis, which is flying, and whenever Medamai the Aegis deals combat damage to a player, take an extra turn after this one. Medamai the Aegis can't attack during extra turns. Thrix of the Sudden Storm, flash, flying, spells you cast with a converted mana cost 5 or greater, cost 1 less to cast, and can't be countered. Really powerful in this particular deck. Zatalpa Primal Dawn is flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible, and is a decent 4/8 on the board, which we can pump up with our Heroes Podium and get to be a lot bigger. Okay, we have Command Tower. Tapped, add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's identity. Base Camp enters the battlefield tapped, but we can tap it to add a colourless, or we can tap it to add 1 mana of any colour and spend only to cast Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, or Wizard spells, or activate those creature types abilities. Azorius Chancery enters the battlefield tapped, and when Azorius Chancery enters the battlefield, return a land you control to its owner's hand, and we can tap it for Azorius. We have Deserted Beach, enter the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Tap it to add a white or blue mana. Evolving Wilds, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, and a Terramorphic Expanse does the same thing, sack it, search your library for a basic land card. Exotic Orchard, tap to add 1 mana of any colour a land an opponent could produce, which is pretty decent, goes in most of my decks that are 2 mana or more. Field of Ruin, tap to add colourless, pay 2, sacrifice it, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Each player searches their library for a basic land card, puts it onto the battlefield, and then shuffles. Glacial Floodplain is a snowland, plains, island. Glacial Floodplain enters the battlefield tapped. Hallowed Fountain, taps for white or blue. As Hallowed Fountain enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. That's also a plains and an island. Homeward Path, tap it to add a colours to your mana pool, or you can tap it to make sure each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. And then we've got Khan's Bastion, tap to add a colourless, or we pay 4 into it to proliferate, put a counter on each of our planeswalkers or creatures. Mystic Gate, tap to add a colourless, or we can pay a hybrid into it to decide which 2 colours we want. Port Town, as Port Town enters the battlefield, you may reveal a plains island from your hand. If you don't, Port Town enters the battlefield tapped. We can tap it for a white or a blue. Reliquary Tower, you have no maximum hand size, and you can tap it for a colourless. We have Scavenge Grounds, you can tap it for a colourless, or you can pay 2 into it to sacrifice it, exile all cards from all graveyards. Skycloud Expanse, pay 1 into it for Azorius. Temple of Enlightenment enters the battlefield tapped. When it does enter the battlefield, you scry one and you can tap it for a white or a blue. Then we have Temple of the False God. We can tap it, add 2 colourless mana, activate only if we have 5 or more lands. And then finally we have 10 islands and 5 plains.
Thanks so much for watching our video. Deck list is in the description below. Please like, subscribe, comment. If you wish to have a look at Moxfield, our other deck lists on Moxfield, please see the links below. We also have links below for our Discord. Come play games with us, come enjoy some Commander games, and we welcome any players of all different walks of life. So welcome to you, and we look forward to seeing you in our Discord or in our next video. Good luck and goodbye.